A couple of people have been asking about this, so I figure more than a month since it took place, it might finally be time to talk about all the goodies that I found at the Hamfest. Hello there everyone, this is uxwbill, and it seems like it would be an excellent idea to move indoors and talk about the things that I found at the Hamfest. But before we do that, I will tell you that this year was a little bit different because I didn't just go by myself or meet a couple of YouTubers at the Hamfest. No, I and several other YouTubers whose names I will expand upon down in the video description area along with links to their channels, we decided to make a regular event out of it. That is to say, we met up about a day before the Hamfest took place, we swapped some equipment amongst ourselves, then we went to the Hamfest, and we had a little bit of fun afterwards. It was a really good time. So, let's see what's behind door number 2. I'll go ahead and start with the stuff that we actually swapped amongst ourselves. A fair warning to anyone who happens to be watching this video before we get too far into it. As I go through this stuff, while I will certainly try to keep such to a minimum, the presentation is going to be rather disorganized and disjointed in certain places, just because that's the way my life tends to go, especially after all this stuff has been sitting here for right around a month and it's been shuffled around and rearranged in various and sundry ways. I will try to keep that to a minimum though, so let's go ahead and get started with the stuff that fellow YouTuber and longtime friend of mine, Weasel2HTM, left here. We'll start with this impressive and imposing beige colored PC case. Right on the front it says it's a Pentium 4, but as always, looks are most definitely not everything. While this system certainly was a Pentium 4 based machine at some point in its life, it at some point evolved to become a Core 2 Duo. And when I first caught sight of this system, I actually thought it was going to be a Core 2 Quad based system, but that wound up in somebody's possession. No big deal though, I have plenty of that stuff kicking around. This case, by virtue of its build quality and the fact that putting brand new cutting-edge computer hardware into an old school beige case is a proven way to reduce the possibility of that hardware being stolen, is likely to see a system build at some point in the future. What's in here now probably works, but this motherboard has more than its fair share of bloated and blown capacitors. And although I think it would run silicon as new as the Dell era Socket 775 Core 2 Duos, I just really don't see it being worth the effort of putting any money into it to replace all those blown capacitors. There's the pertinent details on the board. Some people really don't like ASUS motherboards. I'm not one of them. I've always gotten along perfectly well with them. They may not be the best thing you can get, but I certainly haven't found them to be the worst. This has an add-on video card, an ATI Radeon of some description, I'm sure, based on the savage red color of the printed circuit board. And then for the microprocessor itself, if the scanning electron handycam will cooperate, I believe that says E4500. So a fairly low-end, I believe, Conroe era Core 2 Duo. I did take the heatsink off of this just so you could see what the chip was, and so I could as well. I must say I hate these push-pin heat sinks. Whoever came up with these should be punished, preferably severely, and then these things should be banned, because I have never gotten one of these things to go back in properly. I don't know if they're intended to be a one-time use kind of a thing or what the story might be, but just not a very good situation. So that's this particular system. It's complete. It might even be functional. Maybe at some point when I've got a little more time, we'll actually go through it. Because as it happens, I've started a new job. I'm sure some of you will be very interested to know that. You're probably wondering in what field it is, since I spent the last 2 years of my life studying HVAC. Nope, I'm back in the IT market once again, doing technical support kind of stuff mainly for medical practice. It's not really what I was looking to get back into, but I spent quite a lot of time, effort, and disappointment trying to investigate leads in the HVAC job market, and I just came to the conclusion that while I certainly did not expect to be an expert technician on day one, I was really hoping that someone would hire me on as an entry-level service tech and gradually let me build my knowledge. I never found anybody who was willing to do that across like 50 or 60 different companies. I interviewed with several of them and never really went anywhere, not even during the times of year when they're said to be hiring quite often. And eventually I just gave up on it and said, oh well, I guess I'll go with what I know. And I think my plan at this point will be to work at that for a while, maybe a few years, rebuild my finances, that sort of thing, and maybe go on the whole HVAC thing myself and just start another business. I don't know how it'll play out, and that's not what we're really here to talk about anyway. So let's move this system out of the way and take a look at these two things. These next two things are some repurposed IBM cases. They have the IBM branding on the front. They also identify themselves as having been think centers at some point in their life, but they're new enough that by that point Lenovo had assumed ownership of IBM's personal computer business. I believe these began life as some sort of a Pentium 4 or another. I'm sure I'll be corrected on that in the comments if I happen to be wrong. I think these systems came with an oddly cut down motherboard in that they actually had an AGP graphics expansion slot on the board, but it wasn't functional because of some mistake in the design of the board or the chipset that they used or something along those lines. So the AGP socket, while present, ended up with a cap over it. If you took the cap off of it and tried anyway, it still didn't work. Weasel 2 HTM repurposed these into different things. I think one of them was a server. I'm not sure about the other one. These have in them Intel D201GLY2 motherboards. That's a motherboard with an SIS chipset. Gosh, when's the last time you heard that? And an Intel Celeron 220 microprocessor. As you can see, the board itself is passively cooled, but you can't put it in a completely passively cooled case, because in all likelihood the north bridge will actually be what gets too hot and then the system will crash. So you still have to use fans, but at least the motherboard itself can operate silently. So, you know, if you choose well with your selection of fans, you could get close to a system that operates very quietly. I like these little boards a lot. I probably stand alone in that regard. There are two of those. I think this second one is perhaps more of the same. It certainly appears to be. Looks like it has a slightly older parallel ATA hard drive hooked up in it, and then a serial ATA hard drive playing along. This motherboard, of course, is old enough that it has both parallel and serial ATA channels on it, to which you can attach hard drives. I'm not sure of the exact function of these machines. To be perfectly honest, I'm not really that fond of these cases. I don't believe I'll keep them. I'll strip everything interesting out of them and probably leave them for the recycler. But I certainly do appreciate his having left those here. The motherboards actually came from me to start with. One of them's got the identifying label on the side of the case, side panel of the case, and the other one I think had a different motherboard in it at some point. Yeah, it's a DG31PR from Intel. So these cases have definitely played host to different system configurations. This is a compact disc CD player. Well, there you go, Captain Obvious. This is a Sony CD player. I don't really know for sure what the story is behind this. I know that a couple years ago when Weasel 2 HTM came up here to visit, that he found a CD player at the Goodwill and bought it, but I would have sworn to you that was a Pioneer branded CD player. So I don't really know the story behind this. I guess we might plug it in at some point and see if it actually happens to work. And then, of course, here are some audio and video cables. This one's a long S-video cable. That would have come in handy the other day if I'd actually looked at it in detail and realized that's what it was. And then, of course, here is an RCA series of cables for both video and stereophonic audio, composite video and stereophonic audio. So that's the stuff from Weasel. Let's take a look at some of the other things that were left here. Here's something that I've been interested in having for quite a long time. This was left here by fellow YouTuber Mats78MN. I believe I have that correct. I know him better as Kirby Crazy, but that's not the name that he uses on YouTube. This probably needs no introduction, but in case you're wondering what it is, it just so happens to be a complete Power Macintosh G4 Cube setup. I've long been fascinated by this particular machine, but I've never felt like making the investment in one, and Matt was kind enough to leave this here. So I really do appreciate that, and there will certainly be a video about this at some point in the future. I believe everything needed to make it work is in there. We have the special Harman Kardon orb style speakers. the keyboard, the optical mouse. There's two keyboards. No, there's three keyboards in there. Well, I guess I've got my pick of the litter then, whichever one I like best. There's also an Apple flat panel display. I believe that's the 17-inch model. Let's go ahead and see if we can collect some of the pertinent details about this particular machine. We've got the two USB ports that you would expect, the modem, Ethernet, connection for power, video output, both Apple Display Channel and analog VGA. Of course, the included panel uses the ADC connection. You have your reset button and your programmer switch here on the bottom. I was hoping to maybe find information about this system's configuration, and it looks like it is there, and I just didn't go far enough at first. This is a 450 megahertz machine, 1 megabyte of cache, 64 megabytes of included memory when it was original, 20 gigabyte hard drive, a DVD-ROM, a 56K modem, and speakers. I think the speakers were pretty much standard issue, so I'm surprised they are actually called out as having been part of this system's configuration. I don't know, maybe you could delete them if you didn't want them or something. And then there's this red and black thing, which actually comes from the Hamfest, and you can think of it as foreshadowing, because it is, albeit a very crude effort at doing so. Can you tell me what this is a part of, without watching the rest of the video or skipping forward and trying to figure out where it's discussed? Because that would be cheating, and I know nobody around here would do that. Oh, it's so nice to be indoors and out of that cold wind and rain. To take a look at more Hamfest-related goodies. This year seemed to be a very good year for uninterruptible power supplies. The first one that you're looking at here, with an extremely AirSats battery setup cobbled together just to test it, is an APC Smart UPS 1500. This is one of the later model Microlink UPSs, or SMT 1500, that uses the new protocol that APC has so far refused to provide any documentation for, as opposed to the old school UPS Link or APC Smart protocol. It's complaining about a site wiring problem because my cheap variable auto transformer into which it's unplugged experienced a loss of its ground pin. It fell out one day. I didn't touch it. I don't know what happened to it. And since some clever clogs has felt the need to comment on that, I figured we better just get it out of the way for right now. But it does appear to operate normally. These do have one welcome improvement in that they will power up without batteries in place. Speaking of APC Smart and things that don't power up with bad batteries in place, here we have a 1-unit rack-mounted Smart UPS 1000. I have tested this. It does work. I've since removed them. You can see there's been some sign of leakage there in the battery tray. This came with some seriously squiggly and malformed batteries. I don't know how people let them get that bad, because it's been my experience that long before the batteries bloat and deform, they're already useless and the unit should be failing its self-test. But some new batteries ought to have this thing right back in the game. As I said, I powered it up from my variable regulated power supply, which is sitting right over there, and it worked just fine. And while we happen to be talking about uninterruptible power supplies, there's this thing. And yes, I actually do have the front decorative bezels for both this and the 1000 volt amp rack mount unit that you saw moments ago. This is a 1-unit Smart UPS 750. What I didn't realize at the time, and probably should have, especially by virtue of the presence of a fan on the back panel, this is the extended runtime model. This is the one that you can connect additional battery boxes to, up to 10 of them, and keep it running for a much longer time than the supplied internal batteries would provide for. Speaking of the internal batteries, I did get the pack. Looks like it's actually screwed in. I'll have to get a screwdriver to take that out, but I think it'll be interesting to see just how bloated and deformed those happen to be. As you can see, this thing's not even that old. 27th week of the year 2015, so I'm surprised that the original batteries weren't any better than they are. The blue connector is actually important. It denotes that this is a 48 volt system rather than the usual 24 volt system employed by almost all the other smaller Smart UPS models. And I am surprised that this is a 48 volt system because, well, This is a small smart UPS model. It's only a 750 volt amp unit. But we'll go ahead and turn it around here so that you can actually see the connector for the external battery boxes. And another big giveaway is the presence of a cooling fan on the back. Although they may have revised this with later production models like these Microlink variants. And there again is the model information and the serial number, so you can tell it's got the original batteries in it. Now that, boys and girls, is what I call a battery box. Check that out. It does look like it shouldn't be too hard to pop it open and refit new batteries in place. Looks like they're just your conventional 12 volt, 7 to 9 amp hour sealed lead acid brick battery, all connected in series to give you the needed 48 volt output. Looks like they actually opted for these 7 amp hour batteries. Not that I really think there's a whole lot of difference. I think most of it comes down to whatever they decided to stamp on the battery's casing at the factory that day. But it looks like it should be possible to open this up, as I said previously, and fit new batteries to it. Oh, how tremendously cute! A screw with a triangular head in it. No doubt an effort at a security-style screw to keep people out of there that they don't think should be in there. That's not going to stop me. Not at all. Not even for a moment. See? Not a problem. Nothing to it with a good selection of security bits. Of course, now I'll probably be done for violating the DMCA or something equally stupid. No, these batteries are still in pretty good physical condition, so they definitely haven't gotten so far out of hand as to make removal and reassembly a major pain. Looks like there's a heat shrink wrapped fuse in there somewhere. We'll definitely want to keep that. This has a weight warning on it. Says 22 pounds. I would have expected these to be about twice that heavy. I kind of got to wondering just now if one could turn this display so that it read upright when the UPS was laying on its side. I don't know if you're meant to be able to do that or not, but there are certainly cutouts in the casing for both of the latches. So I simply undid them and gave it a turn. And that looks a million times better. There's one good thing that can be said about these later Microlink model UPSs. You can ask to see their logs and find out what has happened to them, at least in their recent history. Looks like a lot of cases of distorted input and one self-test. Ooh, a faulty vent, a short circuit. Looks like there's only been 2 of those, an overload. Well, actually there's been quite a few more overloads. That might explain why the batteries in this thing failed. Because being as they're only about 4 years old, I would have expected them to be able to hold the load for at least a short period of time. And they wouldn't do that at all. So I'm guessing that someone probably mistreated this UPS, but considering that I don't need it for anything even remotely mission critical, and it was a heck of a steal, I think I gave $10 per UPS, which is way more than reasonable. It'll be good enough for my needs, as will the other ones. And then, from fellow YouTuber, If You Like Good Ideas, there comes this Nova 700 digital time-based corrector. This is utilized to stabilize and correct unstable and sometimes corrupted video signals. I don't know if this actually works or not. I haven't actually tried it, but I do think it's probably a pretty low hours unit because there's essentially no dust on the cooling fan, and it doesn't look like it has encountered a lot of rack rash over the years, though there is certainly some. There's the cooling fan, and there's the pertinent information about this piece of equipment. There were, of course, several examples of Dell Optiplex computer systems available for purchase at the Hamfest, because when are there not Dell Optiplex systems available for purchase at the Hamfest, or in fact anywhere else computers happen to be sold? I happened to pick up 2 Optiplex GX520s for $5 all told, which was probably about $50 too much. These are the cut-down version of the Optiplex GX620 in that they are missing not only the PCI Express 16-lane graphics expansion slot, but they're also down 2 memory module expansion slots relative to the GX620. And why not? Because it's not like the Pentium D, Pentium 4, or in this case Celeron microprocessors were already unappealing. Dell had to sweeten the pot just that much more. These things probably should have been thrown in the trash can. One of them's finicky, but works most of the time. The other one does not power up with a blinking yellow power LED of doom. They're probably both bound for the recycler at some point. In the much better news, I also picked up a Dell Optiplex 780 with a pretty nice ATI Radeon HD 7000 series graphics card in it. You can't go real crazy with the graphics cards in these because you're limited on their length, and you might also run into power supply limitations. But I think it was like a 7770 or something along those lines. Certainly worth the $10 or so that I ultimately ended up paying for that machine, even though the person who was selling it wanted about $40. I don't have it handy or I'd show it to you, but I figure most of you at this point have seen a Dell Optiplex 720 and an ATI Radeon graphics card. And then finally, because what would any uxwbill video be without a visit from my very colorful bed comforter? At least I hope it's finally. I don't think I've forgotten about everything. We return to the land of Weasel 2 HDM for 2 laptops. These are both Dell Latitude D630s. They look pretty much identical from the exterior. The big difference being one of them has the Intel 965 graphics subsystem, while the other one is equipped with an NVIDIA Quadro NVS 135M. This particular version of the NVIDIA graphics hardware being based upon the absolutely infamous G84 and G86 revision silicon, I think these were supposed to have all cooked themselves to death years ago. But this one is still functioning perfectly well. This is an Intel Core 2 Duo based system, but it is not a Centrino platform because it doesn't have the Intel graphics hardware, nor does it have Intel provided wireless. It has a Dell Broadcom wireless adapter of some description in it, and while there is an indication over here in the status panel for Bluetooth on the extreme right side of the panel, that is also not present on this particular example, but it does boot up and it does work. I actually went ahead and installed Linux Mint 19 on both of these machines. I guess had I thought of it, we could have done a little boot up race between the two of them to see which one starts up faster. Turning our attention to the other example, this one is an Intel Centrino based platform because it has the trifecta, the Intel graphics, the Intel processor, and of course the Intel Wi-Fi hardware. This one also has the Bluetooth that the other one doesn't. But as it happens, Dell parts are very cheap on eBay and also quite plentiful. I think I'll probably add it to this other machine at some point in time if that doesn't look like too much rocket surgery for one person to perform. Although both these machines are right around a decade old and their batteries have experienced a significant amount of wear, they are certainly still quite usable on battery. Under modest load, they'll run for about 2 hours, maybe a little more. Under heavy load, the furthest I've gotten with either one of them is around an hour, hour and a half. But I don't really know how far they'd go because the battery logic seems not to be particularly accurate in its bookkeeping on the battery's state of health. As this machine that you're looking at right now sat here for about an hour and a half the other night saying that its battery was at 9% and had about 6 minutes remaining. That definitely was not the case. This machine does a similar thing. As you can see, it boots up just like it's supposed to. They both work very well, and I appreciate Weasel 2 HTM having left these here because they will undoubtedly come in quite handy. In fact, they already have for a few laptop-related projects around here. Now, as much as I hate to do it, it's time to go back outside and take a look at the mystery item, if you haven't figured out what it is yet. If anyone out there in the viewing audience actually happened to be racking their brain trying to figure out what that black and red plastic piece came from, here's your answer. This is further proof that I need to have my head examined and probably have several bad sectors repaired inside my memory as well. I came across this from two guys who were selling it along with a bunch of other interesting stuff. And I walked past it several times, thinking that they would surely believe this was worth a fortune. Finally, I just decided I was going to make them an offer. I have no idea why. I don't even know what I'm going to do with this thing. This is a late 1990s IBM AS400E mini computer system. I don't have a lot of hands-on familiarity with the AS400 platform. I've worked with it remotely using solutions that were provided by other vendors in my IT career of years past, but I've never actually worked with one of these in the flesh. I believe I'm correct in telling you that these are based on a relative to IBM's PowerPC microprocessor family. These are based on a Power microprocessor. I want to say this example is clocked somewhere around 200 megahertz or so. And here's what you get. I have not tried powering this up yet to see what, if anything, it does. I assume that it's complete. I haven't even so much as opened it up. If anybody's got some good pointers on getting started with this thing, I would certainly very much appreciate it. Because as you'll soon see when we turn it around, so that you can see the backside, the collection of ports on it is quite unusual. Look at the size of that power supply. Several ports right there. I have not been successful in finding any documentation concerning the use or operation of this machine. I don't know if I would need some kind of an IBM terminal to speak with it, or if a simple serial terminal or terminal emulator would suffice. I guess we'll see if I can find the type model number on it anywhere here. I know it's got one, just like everything else IBM manufactured in this time frame certainly did have. And there both the type and model number are, so your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to tell me what exactly I might have here, and more importantly than that, what interesting thing I could do with it. It's my understanding that there really isn't much in the way of third-party operating system software that runs on these, so that's fairly limiting, at least I think it is. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't be interested in doing some productive work with this if I can actually do so. Like I say, that's definitely something for audience participation, and there will be a video about this machine in the future. I believe its entire storage subsystem is, of course, SCSI, Small Computer System Interface based. But other than that, I haven't had it open, don't know too much about it. Might try to pop it open here for a quick look inside. Well, I fear that I may have spoken too soon about this machine's functional and complete status, which is what I get for not really looking into it as deeply as I should have. It looks like someone has probably beaten me to all of the hard drives for the unfortunate reason of data security. I do have some fast-wide SCSI hard drives, 68-pin interface, that I could stick in here and try to get the machine up and running, but I don't know where for the life of me, without signing up for big bucks from IBM, if they would even support something like this, where I would get the operating system. These certainly do appear to be a much better design. These hard drive trays appear to be a much better design than those cursed Type 2 backplane and tray arrangements that IBM used in the majority of PC Server 500 machines. Although if you know anything about those, you can definitely tell that the design is at least superficially similar with regard to the connector and backplane designs that they used. And unfortunately, there's not a hard drive on any one of these. I'm probably not doing this properly. So no doubt someone who is more familiar with these and watching right now is cringing. I haven't donated any blood to this thing yet, not that I really want to, believe me. And I'm really spending way more time than I would like to on this. On a cold, inhospitable, rainy, late October, no, early November day. We're into November now. That's hard to believe. There you go, after about 1 billion screws just to remove the side panel, typical IBM overkill. You look inside and you see more typical IBM overkill. Take a look at this motherboard. I don't know what that chip's function is, but it's one of those beautiful IBM blue glass chips. They also made yellow glass versions, but those are nothing like as pretty. Smattering of expansion cards installed within. Most of them I have no idea of their function. But there is an Ethernet adapter of some kind down here, and there's also a direct attached storage adapter, probably with some form of RAID capability and featuring write-back caching, judging by the presence of that battery pack. The idea being behind that if for some reason your storage subsystem lost power and could not commit all the dirty or write cached data back to the disks, that the battery would allow the adapter to do so when power and thus hopefully normal operation returned. Sometimes the actual practice was quite a bit different from the theory. Looks like there's some sort of placeholder module in alongside the system memory. And a very, very big battery. Also a sizable Intel flash memory of some description. I don't know what that would be. Maybe a floppy disk connector. I haven't counted the pins in it, but it certainly looks like the right profile. There's another pretty looking IBM chip back there with a reflective, shiny center and ceramic outline, ceramic package. And then here are the ratings on the power supply, if anybody happens to be curious about those. No doubt this thing is a tank. Although from the rails that they give output figures for, which are the 5 and 3.3 volts, there's only 141 watts available on those, all told. Still pretty good size though. I'd guess that's probably around a 400 watt supply all told. Just kind of doing the math in my head a little bit, which practically ensures that I'll be wrong. But it definitely does appear that someone robbed me of the original hard drives, which is tragically unfortunate and may curtail any experimentation I had in mind to perform with this system. So as always, I would like to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I'm also interested in hearing your constructive views down in the comments area.